Do you need this, Mrs. Kemp?
Hello everybody, this is Mad Matt. Why is my mouth not moving? Because this effect takes too damn long in post. You're watching Movie Mattness. You probably don't care where the nickname Mad Matt comes from, but I'll tell you anyway. I picked it up in college back in the 1980s because of this kick-ass poster that hung on my dorm room wall. If I'd realized back then how much the poster would someday be worth, I might not have slapped it up there with masking tape and let it get bleached out by the morning sun, but hindsight is always 20/20. Anyway, some of the guys in the dorm took to calling me Mad Matt, as much for the reckless way I drank as for my devotion to this particular film. But let's flash back a few years to 1979. In 1979, I was a 16-year-old living in a small Kansas town when the Australian film Mad Max made an all-too-brief stop in nearby Wichita. Its arrival was announced by the most kick-ass poster I had ever seen, something that definitely made me hungry to see the film. But sadly, it was rated R, and back in those days, parents actually cared about what their kids watched. So I didn't get to see Mad Max until the following year when it showed up on HBO, and even then I had to sneak down to watch it after my parents went to bed. From the moment the movie began with its ominous epithet, "A few years from now," I realized I was bearing witness to something the likes of which I had never seen. Because of the film's low budget, all of the effects and stunts were practical and visceral, and this disheveled, futuristic world felt so real you could smell it. Now, based on the poster, I didn't expect Max himself to be such a pretty boy, and at first I was a bit put off by this young unknown Mel Gibson. But I soon warmed to the relationship between Max and his wife Jessie, played by the sexy Joanne Samuel, and I came to like this dichotomy of sorts in Max. Badass road warrior by day, family man by night. Unfortunately, this depth also made the film pretty damn uncomfortable for me back then. After all, the trailer had made it clear that bad things happened to Max's family, as well as to his best friend Goose. And damn it, I didn't want these things to happen. I'd signed on for a breakneck actioner that allowed me to shut off my mind. I didn't actually expect to care about these people. Still, casualties were necessary, I realized. After all, something has to push Max over the edge, has to transform him into Mad Max. A few years later in college, I watched Mad Max again. As before, I was blown away, this time even more so than at my first viewing. To this day, the car chases are some of the most thrilling I have seen, and I've always liked the film's subtle homage to Sergio Leone, not to mention its nods to conventional horror. Mad Max is the B-movie to end all B-movies, and back in the early 1980s, I ranked it right behind my two favorite films of the time, The Empire Strikes Back and Raiders of the Lost Ark, with Road Warrior, Mad Max's sequel, coming in a tight fourth. Is it any wonder that I bought this poster? One sour note, however. In the early days of Mad Max, I admit to a niggling sense of disquiet every time I watched it. It wasn't the violence that got me, nor was it the fact that the story killed off its most appealing characters. No, what got under my skin was the audio track. For those who don't know the story, when American International picked up Mad Max for distribution in the States back in 1979, they feared that the film's Aussie accents might turn off American audiences. So what did they do? Well, what any other American distributor would do. They redubbed the audio using voiceover actors with American accents. Granted, Mad Max retains most of its power, even with the American dub, but it still loses some of its organic quality with the more dramatic scenes suffering an ambiance of kung fu theater. In today's technology-saturated culture, where the internet connects us with fans all over the globe, it might be a bit hard to grasp why Mad Max's American dub was so frustrating. But in the 1980s, the reality was that this was the only dub we had in the States. There was no way to hear Mad Max as it was originally intended. As such, it felt as if the American distributor was in some weird way condescending to us, like a strict parent deciding what we could and could not watch. American International had prevented us from hearing the original Aussie voices of Mad Max's cast because they thought we couldn't handle it. As such, for years, I missed the subtlety of Hugh Keys-Byrne's performance as Toe Cutter, a study in sociopathy dictated by fluctuating accents and variations of tone. Fortunately, today we have a DVD release of Mad Max that contains both audio tracks, the American and the Australian. Again, young people may take this for granted, but for us older film geeks, this is big stuff. I suggest you go out and buy the DVD, listen to both versions, and tell me the Australian isn't better. The delivery not only sounds more natural, but it helps with continuity once we move into Mad Max 2, aka The Road Warrior, which thankfully was never redubbed before entering the States. Between Mad Max, the band Moving Pictures, and Foster's Beer, Australia became one of my favorite places in the 1980s. In 1997, when I finally went there, I was in love forever. It's rather telling that Russell Crowe prefers to stay in Australia rather than move to the States, and his coolness remains intact. At the same time, Australia's one-time favorite son Mel Gibson bought a house in Malibu once he made it big, and look how badly he lost his shit. Bottom line, Australia is spot on, mate, and for me it all started with Mad Max. If you're into B movies, especially the ones that came before the great West Coast sellout, do yourself a favor and snatch this bad boy up. Mad Matt says Mad Max will blow you away, and if you're lucky, You can saw through your leg in 5 minutes.
All right. We've seen what you can do with a boy. How are you when they come a little bigger?